This evening, as it is before all city Belmont meetings, is the reading of our vision statement and our core values. And so with that in mind, I will read our vision statement, where Belmont will be a vibrant, multi-generational community that incorporates small town charm and heritage with an entrepreneurial spirit. Our mission statement is the City of Belmont provides visionary leadership with high-quality city services to create a community of choice for our residents, visitors, and employees. And one of the core values, we lead with honesty, vision, and responsibility. So the first item this evening is to set the agenda for tonight. Is there a motion to do so?
I'll motion.
Motion by Gerald. Is there a second? Second by Matt. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, like sign. There are no minutes from our last meeting. Remind folks, this is a continuation of that meeting. And so what I'd like to do is turn it over at this time to Shelley, and the goal would be for the city to present, the developer to have time, because we asked them to come back and meet as a group and report back out, and then the environmental group have opportunity to speak. So Shelley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a zoning map amendment, the Del Webb community. This is a continued item for the sake of those that may be tuning in on YouTube. I'm going to briefly go over the project and why we're here. So if you recall, this project was presented at your last Thursday at your regular scheduled meeting. This is a request to amend the zoning classification for tax parcel 188444. The subject site is approximately 462 acres in size and located on the south side of Armstrong Ford Road. The property owner is Belmont number 1 US 321 74 Bypass and Southeast Land Management. The applicant is the Pulte Group. Their representative with regard to the application is Fred Matrulli. The representative for the applicant's team tonight is Bridget Grant with Moore Van Allen. So this is a request to change the existing zoning on the property from general residential in a traditional neighborhood development. Again, this is considered a parallel zoning district. They're proposing to change it to a general residential neighborhood center commercial conditional zoning district. Now, the intent of the conditional district is to allow for a Del Webb age-restricted community. It's proposed to have 809 single-family detached home lots on 449 acres. That equates to about 1.8 dwelling units to the acre. There's approximately 100 acres of open space provided, 106 acres of tree canopy preservation. There's an associated roadway network that also includes the future 4-lane divided road referred to as the South Fork Parkway. There's also proposed off-site intersection improvements tied to the traffic impact analysis. This development, this conditional district, also includes a 13-acre portion adjacent to Armstrong Ford Road that is proposed to be a neighborhood commercial center. They are requesting 2 areas of relief. They are related to the minimum lot width as well as the maximum block length. So as you recall, this was just presented to you at your regular meeting last Thursday. After public comment and during deliberations, the planning board requested that this item be continued to tonight's meeting, requesting that there's some members that requested some exhibits which have been provided at your seat. There's one related to an outfall and buffer exhibit. There's also an exhibit related to block length. And I do want to point out something about the block length. So typically we only hear areas of relief tied to a conditional zoning. And in this case, the ordinance already provides an opportunity for block length relief And I'm going to read it into the record, and that would even be for by right development, but it still needs to be considered by the planning board and council. So it's not necessarily just a request tied to this conditional zoning. They could request this if it was a by right development coming before you as well. So what it reads in the ordinance is blocks shall not be less than 200 feet nor more than 660 feet unless site and topography or other special circumstances are present as determined by the planning board and approved by city council. So there is some written relief, but it still needs your consideration. So it's not specifically tied to conditional zoning process. The other item for the continuation, the other reason, was to allow a meeting to be conducted with staff, the development team, and the environmental groups to further discuss their recommendations. This meeting was held this past Monday at 3 p.m. There are some modified recommendations were presented by the environmental group. I did pass that out at your seat. It starts out with the one page. It says, upon closer review, the Pulte development standards, and that was the main focus and discussion of the dialogue between the development team and the environmental team. So their requests were focused on tightening up proposed conditions and then offering other modifications related to surveying and self-inspection. So we have before you a revised, updated list of proposed conditions that has been provided by the development team. Again, they are in the areas of post-construction, active construction, erosion control measures. We're now going to turn this meeting over to the development team. I believe Bridget will come up and speak and go over their modified conditions and how they arrived there.
I was going to say, good evening, Bridget Grant with Moran Van Allen. Pleased to be here again tonight. I'm going to jump ahead. We basically have our presentation from the last time just here for reference. We did spend a good bit of time on the environmental conditions, and with some help and collaboration, we generally strengthen the language using the word shall instead of may in several instances. We committed to skimmering dewatering devices with shutoff valves, which is another recommendation from some erosion control experts. We committed to the double high hazard silt fence in areas within the 100-foot buffer. So anything that was less than 100 feet, any work done in that area, we would have the double high hazard silt fence. Another thing we included that wasn't requested was that the spillway on the sediment basin shall be designed to pass the 25-year, 24-hour storm. So there were a few items that were still outstanding from the recommendations that came from some of the environmental stakeholders. 3 of those were essentially specifically written for the critical watershed, protected watershed areas that aren't applicable in Belmont. And on the bottom, we went back and after much deliberation, when it came down to third-party private implementation devices and the third-party survey, because we aren't working in an isolated and controlled and contained environment, it was difficult for us to commit to some surveys that we weren't really sure how to best utilize the data, apply the data, or evaluate it. So again, we had some great conversations with the environmental stakeholders as well as staff and some of the other attorneys who just felt like it's difficult to apply. I think it's important to note that those 2 items, the third-party implementation and the bathymetric survey, are actually policies in Mecklenburg County. They aren't regulatory tools. They're something that gets implemented on a case-by-case basis in a very controlled environment. So again, we felt like it wasn't necessarily applicable here. We did include the fallout graphic that was requested, and I'll leave it to Mr. Reiking to describe that. The other piece that we provided was the block length exhibit that we discussed after the meeting to demonstrate that in all but 3 instances, we are either at the end of a cul-de-sac or providing green space or open space along each of those block lengths. So I think that gets to the intent when you look at the topography and the conditions of the site of what you would expect in terms of seeking deviations from the block length requirement. I'll let Matt speak to the other exhibit we provided. I'll leave that to the engineers. Thank you.
Good evening, Matt Reiking, ESP Associates. Thank you for allowing us to be here again tonight. I know one of the requests from last week's meeting was to provide an exhibit. I guess there was two requests. One to show more clarification on the buffers, and the second one was to show distances from potential outfalls, BMP outfalls. So this exhibit is kind of all-encompassing. I know it's at quite a scale, may be tough to read, a little bit easier to see on your printout. But what we show there in highlighted in yellow is a 50-foot buffer around the entire project site. So that's 50 feet. That's the minimum undisturbed buffer that we are proposing. And in the language, there is a commitment to provide, on average, a 100-foot buffer along the shoreline. That line is generally shown in green. So there's a white area between the yellow and the green line. That green line would represent 100 feet from the property line, which is the 570 contour along the water. You can see in large portions of the site we're out of that area. We're not disturbing it. We actually have several places where we're even greater than that 100-foot distance that we will work to not disturb as well. So that's the intent. There are a couple places where you'll see that we do have some lots or some retaining walls in that 50 to 100-foot zone. So that's why the request is for the average of 100 feet across the shoreline. The red lines on the plan are approximate linear feet along the travel distance, either to the property line, which only applies to the one BMP on the far east side, which is not against the water. But in every other case, the BMPs, it's the travel distance from the anticipated outfall, where the stormwater would outfall from the basin and flow along current topography, either to a stream or to the river. And those red lines represent approximate travel length. So you'll see several of them will travel across land into a stream, and the stream down to the river. Some of them will discharge directly into the buffer and down to the river. I mean, they're anywhere from 125 feet to over 500 feet in some instances. So I know that was one of the requests, and I know you were interested in seeing some of those. So you can see that the detailed preliminary engineering that's gone into this. We've taken a hard look at this. There are some challenging areas on this site, and we think those locations of the stormwater ponds with the buffer areas are what we are hopeful to maintain going forward.
We are happy to answer any questions you might have about the changes that we proposed.
All right, I guess I'll start. Can you specifically talk about the changes made, or if any, to the block length or lot widths?
We didn't make any changes to the block lengths or the lot widths based on our conversation. We felt it was sufficient to go ahead and just identify that we were already adhering to majority of the block length requirements and seeking some deviations, but still providing open space.
But my understanding is that working with the city through this whole process, you've made modifications to the block length from what you originally submitted?
That's correct, yes.
Based with their recommendation and,
Yes.
okay. Other questions at this time?
If I may, when you talk about spillway being designed for the 25-year storm, are you talking about the primary, secondary, or emergency spillway?
So we will design the primary spillway, which is going to be the outlet control structure for the 25-year storm. We're also
Okay.
going to have a 100-year spillway. If necessary, we're going to model the 100-year storm, and if,
Okay.
if it's within 1 foot of the top of the embankment, we'll provide an emergency spillway.
Okay. And second question is on the temporary seating. I saw in the markup that you were going to apply that within 5 days upon construction being complete. Please explain construction complete.
Yeah, and that's something our team definitely talked about, and it's, it's tricky, as you know, as you're working in an area, you may fill the area, get it to final grade, but then you're still working in that area installing utilities and curb and gutter. So the intent is if the area is not being worked in, if it's complete and the construction has ceased, to stabilize it within 5 days. But if it's active construction, just continue to monitor it through erosion control devices. But then when there's a period, typically 10 to 14 days of no construction activities going on, and it's not planned to go on further, then we would apply that seeding. And then if needed to be, they could come back and then, again, have to reseed it later.
Well, I was going to say that I think the state's regs governing temporary seed application would supersede that commitment in the letter. Is because it would have to be done. If there's going to be an area that's going to be left denuded for any longer than 10 to 14 days, you'd have to do it anyway? Okay. So that'll be a standard in the application.
Yeah, so again, that was another topic that we talked about. The state, many of you may know, have come out with new, the NCG01, which talks about monitoring, talks about temporary seeding when construction. That's obviously applies to every project, so that's something we will follow and something that will be in the development plans.
That's it?
Any other questions this time? Dan, you have?
I got a couple. Go back to the slide, the first one y'all started talking about, that one. Number 3, committed to double high hazard fence in areas within 100 feet of buffer. Can you explain that one versus what is actually in the active construction erosion control measures and what it says?
Let me grab that. Essentially, we agreed to provide double high hazard silt fencing installation along construction activity sites if the land disturbance is within the 100 feet of the jurisdictional stream. So that's anything less than 100 feet is going to get the double high hazard silt fence. So there was a request that we do it within the 50-foot areas, but we're committing to doing it within the less than 100.
If you're disturbing in that area.
If we're disturbing within 100 feet.
I'm sorry.
If we're disturbing within 100 feet of those
Within 100
streams.
feet of the 100 feet? Or
No.
within 100 feet?
Within 100 feet of a jurisdictional water, so river, stream, wetland.
So based off of this and what I see on as disturbance, how much actual fence you think you'd be putting in?
How much silt fence?
Yeah,
Single row, it's going to be significant, probably miles of silt fence.
okay.
Double row, anywhere that we are, you see that green line and you see grading within that green line, that would be areas of
And
double
that's
row.
this map?
Yes.
Okay, what I'm seeing is a lot of grading away from the green line, so there's no fence at all going there.
There's a single row, there would be at least a single row of standard silt fence in those areas. If we get within 100 feet, we've committed to double row, high hazard silt fence. So there's still going to be standard silt fence across the project to meet requirements. We've got to have it. We can't go without silt fence. So there'd be no areas where you're not going to have silt fence. We talked about the upland areas, so we're calling anything beyond 100 feet upland areas, and we're going to have traditional standard silt fence in those areas.
Just to add to that too, the silt fence is a secondary measure. It'll be diverted to the basins as a primary measure. So it'll settle out in the basin before it really gets to the silt fence. Yeah, that's the only thing that runs to the fence, is just the toe of slope on anything that they can't divert.
Okay. On the third-party inspection of site construction activities, there was discussion about trying to find it here. Yeah, I think there was a part about how often the third-party inspections were gonna be, and then how it gets reported and all that, and it's not really laid out here.
As part of the state requirements, again, the general permit, they're required to inspect the site at least once a week or after a rainfall event of over an inch. So that's minimum. Reporting requirements are handled electronically. They can be shared. They're shared with the inspectors electronically, so they would be available. They're also going to be available in the on-site stormwater pollution prevention manual that could be accessed by the city or the county inspectors.
Yeah, I think there was a discussion on Monday about this being a half an inch, and you decided not to go that way.
I don't know that it got written in there. I know
It's
that was
not written in there.
part of the discussion. I think that's something we could add, and I think we were okay with that. That may have just been an oversight about adding a half inch in there. That was part of the topic we had on Monday.
Okay. And kind of along those lines, since there's no monitoring proposed in here at all, but you've accepted putting a valve in. You didn't say you're putting a valve in, but you said.
Yeah, so we did commit to adding the shutoff valves in the skimmers. That was one of the recommendations. The other recommendation was about monitoring and keeping the valves closed until they were determined to be open. And there was just too much gray area about who would open them, when they could be opened, and we were concerned about high flow events. If these valves were closed, it happened over a weekend, there was a high rain event, then you have sediment overtopping spillways, overtopping embankments, because these valves are manual, walk down the embankment, turn them open, and it's really open to somebody deciding, and it was too open-ended for us to decide who was going to be in charge of determining that. So that's
Okay.
why we left that requirement out.
So but you've got a valve there.
We got a valve there in
So
case.
can you go through the steps of what would require that valve to be shut off and then turned back on, even over a weekend?
Yeah, so right now, it's going to be a coordinated effort between the developer, the third-party inspector, and the city and county erosion control inspector. Again, I think we're open to, if the county inspector feels like the valve should be closed for whatever reason, they see high turbidity, there just needs to be open communication about when that valve can be opened. Again, we're concerned about several rain events back-to-back and filling the pond up. So we don't want to just close the valve because we have a little turbidity or we think it's high. We want to be able to open that valve and let it operate like it should. That's why the skimmer's there. That's why the baffles are in the pond. That's why the emergency spillway's there. So there's other measures inside of that, and we thought just saying have a valve, close the valve, was kind of short-sighted for that requirement.
Is the valve intended to be like change the diameter of the orifice, or is it just open close?
No, it's just open closed. And the feedback that we discussed on Monday, the reason was to allow the pond to continue to fill up and allow more time for the particles to settle out. So it's really more contact time.
Okay.
And then because then when the valve is open, basically the skimmer should be floating maybe full pond. So maybe over 2 or 3 days the sediment has settled out, and then when they open the valve, in theory you have cleaner water discharging out of that. But again, it's going to be open to somebody's interpretation when that is, to open and shut it. And it could happen, what if you get a rain event midnight on Saturday night? Nobody's going to look at it until Monday morning.
Yeah, but Matt, if you don't have anybody observing the discharge to see if it's turbid or not, then what's the purpose of having a valve? Because if you're not monitoring it, then you don't know if you need to shut it or not.
Yeah, and that recommendation came, that was part of the compromise. And again, we had some concerns about monitoring and the turbidity. We thought that adding the valve, if it came to where the inspector, we were seeing high flow events, or we were seeing a lot of stormwater runoff, that it could be a measure that could be used. It's another enhanced measure to give the team and the inspectors the ability to say, hey, we need to look at something here, and we need to shut it for a day, let it drain out, or let it settle out, and then open those valves again. So again, it's going to have to happen during Monday through Friday. It's going to have to happen during when the inspector's on site. We just don't want the contractor who thinks the valve should be shuttered, the valve to be open, operating that without guidance. So that's there's a lot of concern about how that would really work.
It's just difficult to regulate it, right? To apply a specific standard, this is going to be handled this way every day, every other week. And
Well-
so we know it's going to be a collaborative effort that does require monitoring.
Well, I disagree that it's too difficult to monitor. Your third-party folks should be out there looking at the discharge in a rain event to see if it's turbid or not, then make the determination to shut the valve. That's really on the third-party inspector and the engineer of record to determine if if it needs to be shut or not. It wouldn't be an inspector telling you to do so, or the city or anyone else. It's really your responsibility to remain compliant, and therefore you should be doing the observations and doing the determination of closing the valve or not. But if you're not going to do that, then there's no need to have a valve.
That's my 2 cents.
So I think what I may do, we've asked some questions, don't leave the room.
Yeah.
Stick around. At this point in time, I'm going to ask, Sheila, do you have anything before we move on to? Okay, so they started at about quarter till, and we probably asked questions for more than half of it. So the River Keeper and the Lake Wiley Marine Commission, I would ask you if you could keep it short and precise. Huh? No, this is continual. Public did last time. It's continuation of what we asked them to do.
All right, thank you all for having us. Like I said, we met with representatives from the city and Webb and clarified our monitoring and survey requests. We do feel strongly that there needs to be quantitative and results-focused stormwater control measures put in place. So I personally don't believe that measuring the discharge for turbidity, we thought that was a compromise. That we asked for grab samples, so during their weekly sampling that they would grab a sample from those outlets, test that for turbidity, and they can do that on site fairly cheaply. And then come up with a plan if it's above X. In this case, we chose 250. That is 10 times the standard for the receiving water, and that's common practice in Washington State to close that. But again, we can meet somewhere in the middle on those kinds of things. But I do agree that having a numeric criteria in place is going to be useful, so it's not just kind of looks orange today or not quite enough. It takes some of that things out of there. We also would appreciate, going back to that half-inch rainfall. That is a standard in Mecklenburg County for they to trigger the inspection as opposed to the state minimum, which is 1 week or 1 inch. Definitely appreciate the high hazard silt fence within the 100-foot buffer and the larger retention basins. However, reading this the way it's set up, if the outfall is designed to convey the 25-year, 24-hour storm within the standard 3 to 5 days, that will actually be a larger outfall than what we had originally requested. We had requested an outfall that was sized for the 10-year storm. And so that allows for, again, that increased settling time. This would be a much larger pipe, unless they only mean that the spillway will be designed and then the actual normal storm would go through the control structure, hopefully with filter bags, which were also not mentioned on here. To briefly elaborate on the 24-hour storm, we're fortunate in that Charlotte has a large network of rain gauges, so I pulled the data for the last 30 years on the closest rain gauge. And in that time, we would expect, based on the rainfall that we've had in the past, we would expect that the 25-year storm be exceeded in 1 week's time about one or half a time per 2 years. If you were to do it for 14 days and had it completely off and turn it back on, to be once over the 2-year construction period, or 1.6 times if you had it closed every 3 weeks. So it's fairly infrequent. I would not expect us to have a lot of these overtopping events based on past precipitation trends. So I'll stop there.
Any questions? Board? If not, thank you. Don't leave the room. Neil.
First of all, I'd like to thank you all for continuing the meeting, and I want to thank Shelley for setting up that additional meeting on Monday so we can all talk this thing out. I think it was very helpful, and I appreciate the concessions that you made to get a few compromises. As I indicated last time we spoke, our recommendations are based on input from the folks pretty much over Mecklenburg. Rusty Rosell, who's the Mecklenburg County Water Quality Program Manager, Olivia Edwards, she's the Environmental Supervisor at Charlotte Mecklenburg Stormwater Services, and Dave Ferguson, who is the engineer, field engineer, who actually goes out and takes the samples. And then Brandon talked to some other folks down in Georgia about the valve business, and I agree. You need to have a valve, you need to have a criteria for it, and if it exceeds the criteria, you shut it off, let it settle. And I agree with you, sir, that that's up to the developer to figure out how to do that. And this is not rocket science. This is stuff that's being done, and it's not hard, and it's not expensive. There was a reference made last week to the River District, and Del Webb is not nearly the size of the River District. But the rest of the properties along the South Fork River are. So this is the first one of about 3, perhaps, that will be developed there. The total over there is 1,697 acres, or 1,700 acres. The River District is 1,400 acres. So when you look at the entirety of this, and this is why we're here talking to you about doing this now and getting these things in place now, because there's going to be more along the South Fork, and there's going to be another one even south of that, just north of Reflection Point, where I live, called the Lakeview Farms Project. And there's another one over on the main channel, Henry Chapel Road. There's water that comes up to the railroad tracks there, and there's a stream that goes down through the one. We need to have these things in place now so we don't have to go through this battle again and convince the next developer that, hey, would you please do these things? So that's why we want to codify it. And the comment was made that, and I'm not sure what you meant by this, ma'am, but this is the first time we've done this. Not sure what that referred to, but what we're suggesting here is implementing best management practices or stormwater control measures that are proven and in place and being used. Now, the critical watershed checklist, as Ms. Grant indicated, that's not something that they do all the time over there, but it's one of the things from which they choose, depending on the situation, to make sure that the appropriate stormwater control measures are put in place. And that's what we're doing here too. So there's an old saying that says, if the minimum weren't acceptable, it wouldn't be the minimum. Well, that doesn't apply here, because the minimum standards in Gaston County aren't good enough. If you were to rank the stormwater control measures of Mecklenburg, York, and Gaston, the 3 counties that abut Lake Wild, Mecklenburg's the best, York is better, and then Gaston comes in last. So what we're suggesting here is that if you put these things in place and make them a condition for the rezoning, and then subsequently put them in the land development code, then we don't have to do this battle again. And you've got it codified so that the next group that comes along will be able to follow. There's 2 of the things that the good folks here at Del Webb were not happy with and didn't want to agree to. And one was the bathymetric survey. And what this is, for the coves that are in this project, you take a sample of how deep it is when you start, and how deep it is when you're done, and if they crapped it up, well, then they pump it out. And if they don't, no harm, no foul. And as Olivia Edwards explained, this can be to their benefit to prove that they didn't do it. Not expensive, costs about $2,000 to $5,000 a pop, so it's something that can be done. She gave it at their meeting the other night, she gave a very compelling reason for doing these surveys. It's something that's done over there, and I think we ought to make sure that it's in our language and in our rules. Again, standard operating procedure in many instances, and it certainly is applicable here. Don't have to refer to you too much about Browns Cove over in Mecklenburg. That place was crapped up for years. It took lawsuits to get it corrected, and they finally had to go dredge it and get it back to where people could use the cove. I'm on the Lake Wiley Marine Commission. In the last month, we've had 2 complaints from citizens about silting up. Beards Creek and Torrance Creek. Well, I'm sorry, Beards Creek and Crowder's Creek. In addition to Browns Cove, there was a blowout a couple of years ago over in Torrance Creek, over in the Mecklenburg side. Well, it's in South Carolina, but the construction was in North Carolina, and it spilled over into Torrance Creek, which is in South Carolina. So that was a real mess. Another one down on Bonham Road in South. So this is not something that doesn't happen. It does happen, and it's recurring. We can put in place conditions and mechanisms to stem it, not eliminate it completely, because we all know you can't do that. But the best management practices that we can come up with will go a long way in keeping the water cleaner. And that's what we're about here. We're not asking for anything that hasn't been done before. On the turbidity sampling, just so you know that Mecklenburg right now has 34, count them, 34 active sites that continually monitor turbidity and some other parameters. You can go to their website right now tonight and see where they are and what it's reading. Now, these things cost about $6,000 to $9,000 a pop to put in place. And it goes to, it's one of these things that goes to somebody's cell phone and says, uh-oh, muster the uh-oh squad, you got a problem here, because you've exceeded whatever the limit you set in. So it works. It's not something that's off the wall. And what we're suggesting is that if you've got one of these huge pipes, if there's going to be a huge pipe, not sure what you all decided on that would be an excellent place to put one of these monitors in case you didn't have a valve or you couldn't put a bag over the end of it, okay? So there's a combination of things. Again, not all the things that Mecklenburg does that we have to do, but we can pick and choose the ones that make sense and they're going to protect this river. Now, Mecklenburg folks have agreed to help us implement this stuff. I've talked to Olivia Edwards. I've talked to Dave Ferguson, the guy who does this stuff. He says that setup, once you figure out where to put that automatic system, it can be put in a day. And you got it. It's done. Piece of cake. No sweat, he says, because he does it. So this isn't something that's off the wall. It's something that can be routine if we choose to make it so. Rusty Roselle said, sediment discharging to surface waters is the greatest source of water pollution in North Carolina. Construction sites are the greatest source of sediment. That's a quote. Construction sites are the greatest source of sediment. So this is what we're about, trying to do things that are reasonable, that are not so expensive that can't be implemented and paid for by the developer, that make sense. And that's what we're coming to. Now here's kind of the overarching thing. The developer wants Belmont to change the rules so they can profit. The Catawba Riverkeeper Foundation and the Lake Wiley Marine Commission want Belmont to change the rules to protect the environment that profits everyone. It's been suggested that the Lake Wiley Marine Commission and Catawba Riverkeeper should approach the county for these changes. And we agree, we should, and we are. But we can't get these things through the county anytime soon. We have an opportunity to implement them here in this instance so that we can set the example for the county. And we can show that we have the wherewithal to do this. I have great faith in the City of Belmont's inspector and the City of Belmont's engineers. They can do this, they can implement it, And I have faith that the third-party folks that these good people will hire will be able to implement these things and check on them. Again, not rocket science.
Neil, let's,
Okay, two more sentences.
okay.
Lake Wiley is a benefit to the city and a draw for Del Webb to sell their homes. It's to both Belmont's and Del Webb's advantage to recommend the measures we're advocating to the city council. And it's also in keeping with the mission statement you just read, sir, about visionary leadership. So I commend that for your consideration. Let's get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. A lot to take in, folks. Does anybody on the board have any questions of?
I have a question
Comments, or-
for Neil.
Sir.
The automatic systems, do you have a number that you're proposing need to be put in, or how many spots do you guys think that these?
What
need
was
to
that,
be?
Gerald? What type of?
When he said it was the automatic system that would
Yeah.
measure the
You know, I would
outflow.
think that this is something that the city and the developer could work out. If there's a huge pipe that you can't put a bag over or you couldn't put a valve on, I mean, I've seen some pretty big butterfly valves in my time, but I'm not sure you want to throw one of those on there, but that would be a place where you would want to have something. If you had something come out, you say, hey, here, this big outfall where we can't put a big bag over it, we want to have a monitor there. There may be a couple of these others that you might want to do that too as well. Again, reasonable people can decide whether to do this, and I would leave it up to the city engineers and the developer to work that out, much as they're going to have to work out some of the other things. But if it's not required, if it's just done in good faith, which is kind of like we'll consider it, it may not get done.
Is that, you talking about the turbidity monitor? Is that
Yeah,
what?
the turbidity monitor.
So is that something the River Keeper or the Lake Wiley Commission could help with? Do they have the
That's something that
resources?
the folks in Mecklenburg County have agreed to help us with, and Dave Ferguson said he'd be happy to come over and show people how to set it up. So,
Do they have
again,
one we could use, or to help monitor the health of the lake? Is that something they're
I'm
willing?
sorry, I didn't hear.
Is that something they're willing to provide and to help for the health
No,
of the
this
lake?
is something that that the developer would
Okay.
normally fall to them to purchase and put in. I mean, this is not uncommon for the developer to have to adhere to certain requirements, but there's no requirement here yet, folks.
Right.
That's up to you and the city council. That's why I'm so adamant about, we've got to make this part of the conditions now, and then take it to the city council for their approval, and then get it in the land development code for the rest of them that are coming down the pike, coming down the South Fork River, and coming down over on the main channel. This is the overarching plea here, to get this thing done and codified, at least for this development now, and the rest of them going forward. We have to fight that battle down the road. But again, this is not something that's off the wall. It's not real expensive. The surveys are $2,000 to $5,000 a pop. Setting a remote system up is like $6,000 to $9,000, according to Dave Ferguson, who does this. And again, they're working now.
Would you agree or disagree that the developers gone above and beyond what's required by the county and the state at this time?
Yes, they have, and I appreciate they have done that, and I commend them for that, and we're trying to do a compromise here. We originally said, we want you to do a survey of the stream. Now, do that doesn't make sense.
Right.
We said, put these automatic monitoring systems all over the place. Doesn't make sense, as long as you're gonna have we went back and revisited what we requested, okay? So just as they did, we did, and we came up with this compromise position of, as long as somebody's doing a weekly inspection, and they can do a grab sample, get it analyzed right now on the spot, that'll suffice. And on these larger areas where you may not be able to get a grab sample, or you want to have something more automatic and real time on a continual basis, that can be set up. You can have it set up so that it reads every hour, every 15 minutes, every 2 hours, whatever the periodicity you choose. So again, we're not asking for those things all over the place. We're saying get the grab samples at most of your outfalls, but the ones that are maybe more problematic, maybe you put one of these things in. Again, what I would suggest is that this be a requirement, And that if the developer says, you know, it really doesn't make sense here, and that may not make sense in all the places, they go to the city and ask for a variance from the requirement. There's no requirement here. That's the key.
Thank you. Any other questions of Mr. Neal or the River Committee?
I have a question for Shelley.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Don't leave the building.
I don't know if this is a question that you.
Before you ask the
Yeah, yeah.
question, can I just provide some feedback regarding some of the requirements here? I don't know if you're going to switch topics or.
No, it's the same topic. I
Okay.
wanted to get into a side, not necessarily a side conversation, but it sounds to me like we're allowing private, entities to hijack a planning board meeting on a project to go over jurisdictional requirements of the city and the county, which is not really what our purview is here. And my question for you was going to be, does the city of Belmont even have jurisdictional authority to implement an erosion control ordinance? So I'm not aware that we do.
So you are correct in that Gaston County and the state regulate the Phase 2 erosion controls carried out by Gaston County. Phase 2, we do have regulations related to the critical and protected watershed that we follow up on. However, that does not apply here to the South Fork River. That is on the Catawba. So in Belmont, the critical and protected watershed is along the Catawba waterfront. I had a long, this goes to your question, but this is a conditional zoning, so, I have to say the city really recognizes the importance of our environment and water quality, and we do recognize that the South Fork is an impaired waterway. I had a long discussion with Joseph Alm of Gaston County, who, again, their department regulates the city's erosion control. And I was going over the conditions with him to better help educate me and how they have a role in it. And I actually used the handout that was passed out on Monday and discussed in the meeting. At that time, that was the most recent recommendations from the environmental stakeholders, and I specifically talked to him. He voiced a lot of concern when I came to the requirement where it said they would have a valve. I'm not talking about the 7th or 8th bullet, but it was up here further where they were going to install a valve, and the first thing he said, he said, pause.
Yeah.
What is this valve? Who's going to take control of it? How is it going to be monitored? And then we jump down to the eighth bullet on here. And he voiced a lot of concern about that. First he said, I've never seen it. He says, I've never seen this. And if you condition it this way, we would have to evaluate it because they review the plans.
Yeah, I have the same concern.
And they would have to reach up to the state, and that there would be a whole education component before they could approve the plans with this valve requirement. And it wasn't so much the valve, it was more the controlling, how it was going to be regulated. They were concerned that if the city conditioned with this criteria and required this, and for some reason some kids or somebody did something wrong and it blew out the basin, he said the city could be liable because we required it.
Yeah.
So he just cautioned, be very careful and make sure that everybody clearly understands, who, what, when, and the implications and liability that can fall on the city as well related to that. So we spoke about the valve and the requirements there, and then we spent a little time on the 7th bullet about the surveys. And he understood about the surveys, but again, we were using the sheet passed out on Monday at the meeting, and it has some specific things in here regarding if signs of sedimentation in the coves occurred during the project construction, data will be collected post-construction for comparison with pre-evaluation data. If analysis of data indicate an unacceptable accumulation of that sediment beyond natural sedimentation, the financial responsibility will be required to, party will be required to restore the water body to the pre-development depth. Well, what Gaston County informed me is it really would be the call of the state.
Yeah, 'cause the state has ultimate
Regarding the
jurisdiction.
sedimentation in the coves, based on these, that they have control of the water. And again, I'm trying to recall the conversation, so excuse me. But they said that, you know, there's some issues with that in that the state would have to evaluate it to see if there were any problems there. Then they would look at violations that were reported to the state and how they can really distinguish who it actually came from. So, and then the state would say what remedial work needed to be done, because if it's dredging, my understanding, if there are problems in coves of sedimentation, they evaluate it, and sometimes they won't implement remediation because it would cause more damage to dredge up the area. I'm not saying that's what happened, but that's what they were explaining to me. So from Gaston County's position, they were very concerned about the 7th and 8th bullet related to the valve, the monitoring, and then how we could really implement the 7th bullet, because it's really the state's involved as well, and how do you really determine who is contributing to the sedimentation. Now, what was interesting, I learned a lot from the meeting on Monday with Olivia from Mecklenburg. You know, she explained what they do is they do the research if there's sedimentation, and they look at all the violators that contribute to there, and then that's how they determine who has a role in addressing an issue such as this. We don't have that ability. We don't have, basically the state would do that for us.
Mm.
So the county and state would have to handle that aspect of it. So, yeah, they just, the word I have is those two would be somewhat difficult to implement. And there's some concerns in education that has to go along with it, that Gaston County's not ready for, and they'd have to depend on the state input.
Yeah, because I just wanted to
Consider-
remind everybody that we're asking for block length and lot width. And they're giving, you know, some things in return in order to get the allowances for block length and lot width. And we're
Well,
talking
again-
about jurisdictional requirements at the state level. I mean, this is crazy.
So I understand what you're saying. I think it's great that we have a development team willing to meet with the environmental groups
Mhm.
to discuss water quality on an impaired waterway. So I think they're showing a good faith effort to be good stewards and to start a bigger conversation for both Belmont and the county on reevaluating our water quality regulations, and I think further discussion needs to be had, but I really appreciate that they're willing to step up to the plate and agree to what they've agreed to. And it does include, they did agree to the use of filter bags. That is something in their list. They indicate the use of filter bags at sediment basin outlet discharges shall be used where feasible due to topography and buffers. And then the last sentence, I'll read it full. It is noted that the use of filter bags may not be feasible in high flow areas or subject to other site constraints.
Yeah, and then what do we do when the county plan reviewer says that we're not going to approve the plans because your filter bags are going to restrict the flow up from the outfall? I mean, these are things that are not up to the city to decide, I don't think.
Well, it's
I would.
definitely going to be education and coordination, absolutely.
I agree too. I appreciate, Neil, what y'all have done. And I think this starts a discussion we probably should have had 3 or 4 years ago, right? I think we know we're behind, but to me, it seems like we're into the 11th hour trying to do. And I think they've agreed to some things. I mean, they, could have put their foot down and said, no, we're not doing this, and then the city's got to decide. I think they've agreed to do this. I think it's a starting point. But I think we got some time that we need to start with the city and the county, trying to get something in place so we don't have to have this conversation all the time. You know, I think I don't know if we're meeting in the middle, but I think it's, to me, a win-win, you know, going there. So I don't know what else you got, Shelley, to present, or if the board wants to
Just a
start.
couple more things, and I'm trying to find the little details here, but, on the one related to inspections shall occur at least once a week and within 24 hours after any storm event or greater than 1/2 inch of rain for 24 hours. My understanding is they are committing to that. So, yes, so that is something, it was left out in
So
there.
where is
So-
that, the 1/2 inch? Is it,
Go ahead. Fifth bullet.
is it one of the bullets in here?
It's,
Or we need to add
you
it?
can read it on the meeting speaking points, or.
I saw that, but I didn't know if it was in.
It's not in there.
So is
That's-
the
that's what-
petition what we're going to be, can use in our motion?
Yes,
So we do need to change
that
F-
particular one with
FII.
regarding the provide third-party inspection of site development. Just want to make sure, I don't want to misspeak for the applicant.
So an added sentence of inspection shall occur at least once a week and within 24 hours after any storm event or of greater than 1/2 inch of rain per 24-hour period.
So we can add that line. The only difference was that it's currently required to be 1 inch, and so we're taking the current requirement of 1 inch and just amending it to a 1/2 inch.
Correct. Okay.
So where is that, Matt?
It's,
What
so,
page?
7II, it's the
The
fifth bullet point.
currently is
But we're going to
Five.
put it where? I'm trying to get it where it's
Yep.
on this.
In the fifth bullet point, provide third-party inspection of site development, construction activities.
In here.
And then the added sentence.
They're going to add the sentence that the state required 1 inch, they're going to add that greater than the 1/2.
So basically,
This
putting
one.
7FI
This one.
up in,
Attach it to this, it's missing a sentence.
just trying to be clear here. Okay.
Absolutely.
So Matt, you know that, right? When we go through this, where it's R&D.
And then, if we're done with the questions related to water quality, I'd like to wrap up, just to remind us where we need to go on this. So with any zoning map amendment, we're required to make findings that it's a reasonable request and consistent with the comprehensive land use plan, in this case, a small area plan, which it was recommended that we find it consistent in the area of land use, mobility, parks and recreation, and environment for, again, the applicant has stepped up to go above and beyond the minimum requirements for area. So it was staff's recommendation that the findings could be made to support the request. There are conditions of approval that have been provided and is updated and as discussed here tonight. And we think that the conditions related to land use, age, restricted community, water quality, architecture, and transportation are good to support this project. So again, we're going to ask you to receive the report. I didn't remove public comment. And then render a recommendation to City Council. So of course, with all cases, you can motion to recommend approval as presented, approval with modifications, or recommend disapproval.
Okay, I'll move to approve.
Can I
I'm not ready yet.
All right,
if you
I'm
don't
not
mind.
there yet. either.
sure.
Can I ask a question to the petitioner? In section F, when we're talking about petitioner shall in good faith implement the following enhanced stormwater, why is the term in good faith as opposed to just petitioner shall implement? And do you guys have any issue with striking in good faith out of that, since everything else is shall versus may?
I don't think we have a problem striking it. I think when we were setting the tone, it was in good faith that we were going to strive to meet these standards. We built in with conversations with the environmental stakeholders as well as staff, the recognition that we can't have absolutes on all of these. I think that was demonstrated through the conversation this evening. And so our good faith effort is going to be to try to execute these prior to seeking any exemptions from staff.
Okay, so you're okay if we just strike that term out?
Where are you striking, Jerry?
So on F, petitioner shall, and then there's in good faith. So it would just be petitioner shall implement.
Okay.
There's subsequent sentences that say we will work with staff if we need to seek modifications on any of these. Again, it was just setting the tone that we're going to try to limit that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I guess I would also like to see that modified to say, as approved by Gaston County permit review, or something along those lines, just to take the city off the hook. Is anyone objecting to
I'm
that?
not following. Say that one more time.
I want to put some language in here that they'll do this as approved during Gaston County permit review, because the city has they won't look at this at all during permit review other than the stormwater piece. Anything erosion control related is going to go right to the county. So if the county says no, I want them to have the final say. Like if they oppose to the valve, or if they oppose to the filter bags.
Okay, so it's recommended that the petition, under 7F, the petitioner shall implement the following enhanced stormwater measures subject to the provisions set forth in here as approved by the county. And again, I did go over these conditions, and again, they were supportive with the ones that they were supportive of the ones proposed here tonight. The only real concern they had was with the one condition that proposed a valve. They had questions about that because they have not done that, but they said they could look into it and discuss it with the state.
Yeah, and I'd love to get Parks' take on that too, because in all honesty, I don't even think we're able to make recommendations like that. I think that puts us in a huge liability-like situation.
And the city attorney, Parks Wilson, will be reviewing these, continuing to review these.
Okay.
So what is the discussion then to strike that at this board and not have it go to council? I mean, what I'm hearing is that the valve can be shut on and shut off by some middle school kid. It can be shut on and shut off by an inspector, by the developer.
You got to put some
Yeah,
law
or-
or something on that. And
I can't.
You can put controls in to maintain the protection of the valve and your house will be controlled, but if you don't monitor during a rain event, you don't monitor turbidity and everything else, you know when you should turn the valve off or on. There's no sense in having a valve, but I do agree with Nick. We don't have jurisdiction to even require the valve.
So then it shouldn't be as part of a condition.
It shouldn't be a condition of our.
No, I don't think it
But I-
should.
isn't-
Unless you put the clause in that the county has final say, yes or no. We can recommend it with their approval, essentially.
The way the city can protect water quality in the city limits is to pass a watershed protection ordinance or a watershed overlay for these properties right along the rivers and put certain water quality standards in there and requirements in there. And that can be done over and above what the state requires. But we don't have that right now. So we're talking about things that we can't even control.
What we can't control is if it's in the conditions or not. We
Yeah.
can do that,
But if you do it in the conditions without having
We
jurisdictional authority, then you're opening the city up to.
which is why
So-
I'm
That
is
suggesting the
true as well.
conversation
Yes,
to
that
strike it.
So to clarify my point earlier, basically, like Gaston County goes to the state and they apply to be a jurisdiction that reviews erosion control plans. There are counties, I'm not sure if there are any anymore, but at one point, there were counties that didn't have jurisdictional authority. Your permit goes right to the state. So in certain counties, there's no development, it's not a big deal. But there's certain projects even in this county that go right to the state because the city doesn't have jurisdiction on them. So I mean, it's not like Charlotte-Mecklenburg where they're a major city and they can afford to do these kind of inspections and stuff like that. I mean, we're up to a larger body to make those calls.
We don't have the resources.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, inspection, can't do that.
So I mean, if what I'm hearing from you guys is that this is not defendable from the city's point of view, why are we even discussing it?
Because it's in the conditions.
It's in the conditions.
I understand. So why is it in the conditions if you're saying we can't implement it?
We didn't put
I mean,
these
if we're-
conditions in
Because
place.
I'm ready to
This is
say
what
we
the
should-
law does.
If we're allowed to put it in the conditions, then we're allowed to increase what conditions are in here. Is that correct? We're allowed to manipulate the conditions.
Well,
Because
so-
we're doing it,
There's a difference though between like, you know, the city can review things like silt fence, high hazard silt fence versus regular silt fence because both silt fence and high hazard silt fence are approved by the state manual. Doing turbidity monitoring and other things like that, those are way above and beyond what the state requires. That there's a major difference between the two things, and I think what they're offering, you know, putting these plans together and stuff like that to show that they're further away or adding additional buffers, those are all things that the city, I do believe, has jurisdiction over or can have jurisdiction over as a condition. We're not talking about, you know, dredging the creeks and stuff like that. That's way crazy. So I think this is reasonable, a reasonable request, considering what they're asking for is block length and lot width.
So would you support striking the first bullet under FII?
What,
I don't think we
striking shut-off valves?
I don't think we necessarily need to strike anything. I just think we need to word it in a way where it's the city recommends this under the idea that the county will ultimately review it and they have final say over approval or disapproval. Because I don't think we need to be getting into the business of implementing things that, in all honesty, you know, I think we all agree that we want cleaner water. I don't think anyone's against that. But, you know, Neil needs to make this presentation to the county and then the state, really. I mean, this needs to go way up the chain past the city of Belmont. So I just want
I
to keep
don't-
us out of it.
Can I just say, I don't think as a civic board, we need to worry about whether what we're recommending or not recommending is legal or how it fits within that. That's what, you know, Parks or outside, whoever the city hires for the legal part of that. I mean, I don't think we need to get into the weeds of trying to figure out what is okay or not okay. That will be determined by experts in that regard. I would put that on the legal
So you
counsel
find just
for-
leaving that in there and
for
then let it go where it
Just
needs to
leave-
go? and-
Whatever we want to put in there,
Okay.
because you know, it's the lot length and the block lengths, and it's a trade. We're making a trade with you guys saying, you know, we're giving up this and you guys give up this. And then if there's, you know, let the professionals figure out what is, if there's something that's not okay or okay to be done with the different agencies.
So I have an area of clarification, though, because I think we're all pretty much on the same page, it's just getting there. So the right-of-way dedication, I'm sitting there looking at, it says that Road A is the preferred route in, but it talked about trying to acquire, this is in item 2 or 3D, about acquisition of right-of-way in good faith effort, trying to acquire additional right-of-way. Can you explain what that entails?
We would need, well, legally, no. However, we have in the past required, when additional right-of-way is required for off-site improvements, we require proof of acquisition before we approve the construction plan, or proof that they have tried to acquire right-of-way and the property owner will not sell. That information is presented, it would need to go back to city council because some other alternative would need to be considered, whether it's in lieu fees or some other, if
Okay.
NCDOT is willing to partner to help acquire the right-of-way, but they would not be able to move forward with the release of construction plans on that particular phase until they've gone back to council and explained the situation.
Because I think we all know that Road B, where's the east way? Is that A or B?
That's B.
B. I think we all know that's the best route for the city.
That's the preferred route.
Preferred
Yes,
route.
the preferred route consistent with the adopted plans. And NCDOT, this team did a really good job in further exploring the intersection to determine if we could come up with some alignment that could make that intersection happen. And NCDOT did come back and indicate that A was off the table because of the skewed nature of the intersection. We explored, can it be 2 lanes? But no, there's left turns. So we really looked at it. It has some constraints with the transmission lines that are there as well. So we did
Is it the
explore that.
transmission line, or is it the house across the street?
Well, it's the house across the street, but you can't really move it that much because of transmission lines and towers as well. So it really limits that alignment where it can come in across.
I mean, I just didn't know if
Eastwood.
anybody would even try to acquire that property.
sorry?
If someone would try to acquire that or get an option to get that, I mean, if the developer's willing to build the vast majority of that boulevard down
Right.
there
Mhm.
versus coming in at Cimarron. I know we can't require them to go do that, but I hate to have this option of where we could build that road in there and not, I mean, this has been on the plan for 30 years, right? And there's a dang pinch point there that we can't get across. You know, I don't know, and I'm not putting it on the developer to solve that problem, but
I do want to clarify, we are setting aside the right-of-way there. We know that the right-of-way needs to remain along that alignment, and we did spend numerous amount of time and hours and engineering efforts, both our engineering teams internally, NCDOT's engineers, congestion management, and we got no's across the board. We know that that's the preferred route, but we got shut down at every turn we tried.
But nobody's tried to acquire that property or option it out, or, okay.
Did you even do a design that included that lot into the opportunity to build the road through, maintaining the power lines on the right side?
I believe it might have taken more than that lot, but we don't have Brady here, the engineer that Kimberly
Okay.
Horn that went over those studies.
Just from what I see on the alignment on the drawings, it does look like if you were to maintain that alignment and cut across Armstrong Ford Road and go straight into Eastwood towards the curve, that the corner lot would probably be enough. You might need a hair of a sliver off the lot behind it to complete that access, but you could do that without having to move the power line at all. And transportation traffic is my concern, and I'm voting no on the subdivision for that very reason. The fact is that we've gone off and talked about all these improvements off-site, and we've made requirements to acquire right-of-way for those improvements, but we didn't do that here at that intersection, that critical intersection, to finish out the boulevard. So we've left that, and it looks like we're kicking that can down the road yet again, and improving that intersection and improving that boulevard all the way through. So, and that coupled with the fact that I have studies after studies that discuss that the ITE numbers that are used for this type of development are insufficient. They project the numbers, the trips, well under what really happens. So, and that was just a 20-minute research on the web. So, anyway, that's my point.
I don't know if we solved anything, we got stuff off our chest. I do hate to miss
No, we
that
had good
opportunity to
dialogue.
build that, you know, and
They are at least going to leave it as a dedication.
they are, I'd prefer them build it.
I do too, but at least we're not eliminating it within the neighborhood.
Dedication for what?
Correct.
Well, theoretically, if the state comes in and they do the full boulevard, well, that goes all the way through Mount Holly, right?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
that's $100 million project, they'll buy that property. in a
Well,
second.
hopefully the right-of-way that they're going to dedicate is going to be enough or sufficient or in the right place. Otherwise, we're talking about a whole nother different
Yeah.
right-of-way dedication.
We-
But
we
if it was built,
coordinated that.
it'd be there and be done.
Talking about roads, I do want to just recall from last week, we talked about connecting over to South Fork Drive and making sure that that gets into the conditions and into the site plan as a underneath the transmission lines. There was talk to dedicate right-of-way to that.
All the way up to, of the South Fork Parkway, all the way up to Armstrong Ford Road, the section they are not proposing to build.
Yes.
No, you were talking about in the,
Oh, I'm sorry, now I get it. Yes, we should, yes, they were going to, we can
Okay.
add that as a condition that they would stub out over to that roadway.
yeah. Keep in mind, that's not built. I mean, up in the
Yeah, it's an
subdivision,
unbuilt
so
road, but it will be stubbed out. If they stub out,
if ever, you know, whether it's a bike path or whatever it may be down the road, we've got the right of way to
yes,
tie into that.
yes, that needs to be added, and they agreed to do that.
So we've got that added into the. Any other discussions on?
I have, and this is totally unrelated to traffic and the river, which I think are I think traffic's the most important issue, but there's gonna be a walkway or a greenway around this?
Yes, there's a 2.7 mile greenway along the South Fork River. They're proposing to build a 8-foot wide natural trail that would be open to the public within a 20-foot easement to end. It would be dedicated, built by the developers and then dedicated to the city.
Okay, so who maintains
The
that?
city would maintain that in the future.
Okay, so it would remain open to the public, it's not?
That's correct.
It couldn't,
That was
it wouldn't
important.
change unless the city made a decision for that.
Yeah, that was something that we discussed from day one to ensure that the public has access to the waterfront, to the public trail.
Can we have a discussion about lot widths? There's, just to put that to bed, we didn't address that really last week at all. Are there any concerns with the conditions for the 42-foot wide lots and the 55?
42,
and Sorry.
52, and 70 is
Thank
what
you.
they're proposing.
Good.
Do you have a concern?
No, I just wanted to put it on the table
Yeah.
for discussion.
That's basically the only thing we hadn't discussed, right?
Correct.
With- Yeah. So I think I'm open to a motion to approve as modified. We have the modifications that we've made off of what was presented. One is the, I think there's a half-inch, the rainstorm
Right.
there. So we've got that paid, and then we also have the extension of South Fork Drive, that 50-foot right-of-way.
We're striking in good faith on section F
F,
and including as approved by the county.
yes.
That's all I have.
So those are three modifications to what we have here, right? Is there a motion to approve as modified and so noted here?
So moved?
There's a motion by Nick.
I'm
Is
sorry,
there-
who said that?
Nick,
Nick, thank you.
is there a second? I will second.
Second.
Are you second?
I'll
Okay.
second.
Okay, no.
So there's a motion and there's a second to approve as modified. Any further discussion? All in
I just
favor?
wanted, I think we talked about the traffic, Norman, you brought it up, the study, and, one thing that Dan brought up, I think your first question at the last meeting was, how many lots could a developer put on this property with the current restrictions versus with the relief we're giving, because I understand, someone could come in and develop this and put whatever they want on it within the current restrictions and not have to make any traffic modifications. But I like the development from the standpoint of it being age restricted, as opposed to just a single family one, because you're not going to put as much stress on the school system. But putting this size of development in that area with the traffic that we've got, to me, I like the development. You guys have done a lot. You're doing things to be good stewards. But from just a community standpoint, is it something that if this doesn't go forward, is it going to hurt the community more than if it goes forward? type aspect of it. You know, I think we're always talking about development, and we have that in Belmont. We have tons of development. And I just think looking at the impact of, you know, a traffic problem that we have, that's just going to get worse. You just consider that when we're voting on that, or on this.
I want to echo Gerald's concern. I have the same traffic concerns about the study, our consultant's information, where he gets it, versus other options of how this traffic is going to work. Similarly with environmental, it's being done on the same lake, better and more concise with regulations. I think this project is too big of a project to approve at this time because the county's not ready for it, for environmental. And and at least some of us have questions about, is the traffic study ready either? So it's just too big a project, in my opinion, for it to go forward right now.
Yeah,
So are we just going to approve 50 lot developments in Belmont? Are we just afraid
Well,
of
there's a big
the
difference between
Are we
50 and
afraid?
800.
Well, so,
Let a member talk. Are we afraid of development? Are we afraid of things coming in being too big? I mean, how can you go to a developer and say, this can't be 800, it can only be 300?
But you can do it very easily when you have a development of this size come into a small town where we already have traffic problems. They have to pay for the traffic improvements that is necessary for their congestion that they're going to create.
They are doing that.
No, they're not.
well, yeah, they are per the ordinance. I mean, it's all perspective. What are they doing now that they can't do otherwise? Lot width and block length. So that's all we're here to do. I mean, we can't solve the world's problems here.
I understand that, but when you have an issue with the traffic, the TIA in and of itself, and the fact that the numbers appear to be way lower than what they should be, and we see a development of over 800 homes coming into the heart of Belmont, which is what I'll call it, the heart. This isn't off down near the lake or down near South Carolina. This is right down the street from downtown. You can walk to downtown from here.
And it could be here with some conditions, or it can be here completely by right. So we got to weigh that too. I mean, what are we?
I hear you loud and clear.
What are we looking to do here?
I hear you loud and clear, and by right, yes.
Because by right could be like.
By right, they could
Gerald's point,
do
it
whatever
could
they
be-
want and not have to do a TIA. Or
Yeah.
would they? Let me ask that
Well,
question.
they would.
They would still be required to do traffic.
Okay, so we would still have an opportunity to get traffic improvements for the congestion that they're going to create if they were to do it by right. So
So it makes no
Yeah.
difference.
we're not rolling the dice and saying, well, if we don't approve this one under these conditions, then, oh no, another developer, big bad developer can come and do whatever he wants. And
Well, the other development could be straight single family, more students in the school, more trips to work, you know.
Okay.
It could be worse.
okay,
So
but then the traffic improvements would be in like kind.
Yeah, and it would be the same thing. You're only fixing the impact. You're not fixing the existing problem. And that's what the traffic study is doing.
Listen, I hear you.
Yeah.
I
mean,
would,
that's-
I
But
would
we
add
continue to
this.
kick the can down the road on traffic. And we continue to let these little 10 and 15 and 25 and 50 lot subdivisions come
Yeah.
into town, and they're not having to do anything for traffic.
But we need to have the perspective of what we're here to do for this project and not look at these global
But I would
problems.
remind this board, though, that the traffic consultant is our consultant, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
And Kimley Horn is a very well-respected
yes.
traffic engineer. And I'm a civil engineer, but traffic's not my thing. But, I mean, the developer paid the money, but we're the ones that have chosen this firm to do it. Now,
I hear you.
we got to take those numbers. Now, whether or not it's subject to being 100% traffic never is. And I would add that the only thing that I'm concerned about is the Eastwood Road alignment. It might be out of our control if that's something that could get fixed, but,
But Chairman, if we make them buy right away for all the other off-site improvements, why can't you ask them to buy the lot on the corner and finish the intersection as well?
I don't, that's a legal question, I can't.
They can at least try like they're gonna go and try for all of the other right-of-way improvements, correct?
That's for DOT to determine.
And I think to like this, the discussion, this is a difficult project to vote on, but I do think, you know, the discussion that we're having between, you know, before we vote, however, if it's approved, disapproved, you know, the city council is gonna make the final decision on this. But this, the conversation of whether you're for or against it, and your concerns, you know, I think we're all, as the person who I have the least knowledge as far as development and real estate among this board, you know, we're all from different parts, I think, of Belmont, and to raise our, you know, our concerns, you know, whether we're voting for it, or, you know, what we think is good about it, what we think is bad about it, you know, we just need to raise the concerns and give our thoughts to the city council, you know, going forward, whether, you know, whether it's approved, disapproved, just to have this discussion for city council to kind of look at the issues that are going forward. You know, we're not making the decision tonight whether this goes forward or not. It's going to be city council's decision. But I do like the discussion that we're having, you know, even if there's some disagreement, to kind of raise the issues for city council to focus on going forward.
good comment. And they'll have these minutes before that meeting, correct?
Yes,
Best you
they
can.
will.
Yeah.
Can I ask another question? Tell me again, it's at 7 intersections that they are getting some type of relief for?
Yes.
Is there any other development we've had that's done anywhere near that many
7?
intersections?
Not that I can cite, no.
Have we
One
had
or
a-
two?
Have we had one that's done this?
McLean was larger
McLean.
than this. McLean had 800 homes,
Yeah.
100
traffic circle that
multifamily,
doesn't work.
and a bunch of commercial, I can't remember how many acres.
I can't
So
comment.
it was
So I think
larger.
that would be a valid point just to have in the record.
But,
that-
yeah,
that
we
there
didn't
are a lot of
review that
intersections.
TIA, that was done by NCDOT, that's why we started taking it into our own hands to hire our own consultant to prepare the traffic study. One thing I'd like to clarify, I know I said into the record, I want to clarify this, you know, if it was by right or conditional, they would still be subject to the TIA. Now, one thing that this TIA evaluated was the South Fork Parkway, and based on the traffic study, they only needed to build 2 lanes of a 4-lane divided road to handle their own traffic. They are offering up the full cross-section of the segment they're building, so we are still getting above and beyond some of our general requirements. We have to remember that we're getting above and beyond architectural requirements and open space area, and now with the help of the environmental stakeholders, we're raising the bar in Belmont on our water quality requirements. So I think this just is the beginning of raising the bar on various aspects of development in Belmont.
And also in this parcel, in the South Fork small area plan, what's the total acreage?
About 1,100.
So this
It's
is 400,
1,081 or something like that.
462 of that.
This is 462 acres of the entire small.
And so that parkway through there is how long total? You know?
I don't know the entire length. They are
There
building.
it goes.
Right, I know
I
that, yeah, I'm
believe
just curious.
Almost 3/4 of a mile.
What percentage, are they building a third then? If this is a third of the whole parcel roughly?
I'm sorry, I don't want to put that into the record because I don't know the distance, but it
Okay.
goes through all 3 properties, and
Okay.
this is a large,
And
a
if
third
this
of
one
it.
is established as 4 lanes, those as well would have to be
Yes,
continued on as 4
any
lanes.
future development, again, this is, if approved, this is establishing where
Right.
this developer is building the full cross-section. The next person in, we're going to ask them to build the full cross-section as well.
And have a
Yes.
established,
Yes.
But
Yeah.
if it was a right, if someone developed it as a right, what would the responsibility be just for that
For the parkway,
Yeah.
they would just, so
We're
the
not
way that
really-
ordinance is written,
As a county
the
in a city,
TIA
we're not really-
ordinance is they're only responsible for mitigating their traffic impacts. This development only needed to build a 2-lane section of that 4-lane boulevard to carry their traffic for the single-family homes, and still would require all the off-site. So they're really only responsible for 2 lanes, and that would be by right or conditional. However, they are willing to build the full cross-section of the segment that they're building.
There's a
Call the
motion.
question?
Yeah, I call the question. So there is Nick made the motion and Allison second. We had discussion. That's all in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye. It's 4. All opposed, like sign.
Aye.
Mine 4-3, is that correct? Approved, 4-3. And so there's 2 required findings. I don't know if we can go by that, Shelley, or to read what we've got in the handout on our required findings.
Your required findings, do you have the original report? Oh, there's 2 required findings. One is, the first finding is that it needs to be a reasonable request and in the public interest.
What page are you on?
Well, on the slide, I'm on
Up there.
the bottom. The 2 findings required. The first one, the map amendment is reasonable request and in the public interest, and that needs to be followed by another finding that the map amendment is consistent with the goals of the comprehensive land use plan, and I can go to that slide.
I'll make a motion, Chairman.
Okay, she's getting there. It's on page 19, I believe.
I make a motion that the proposed age-restricted active senior community project is a reasonable request in the public interest by maintaining consistency with the South Fork Small Area Plan, that it indicate that it provides transportation mitigation that addresses the impact of traffic, and that it includes the development of a portion of the South Fork Parkway.
Okay, how about the consistent goals too, number 2? Do both of them?
Did I miss one? And with the goals of the comprehensive land use plan in the areas of land use, mobility, parks and rec, and the environment.
So there's a motion on the table that it, request is reasonable and is consistent. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Nick, original by Matt. Any discussion?
I would like to point out that on the environmental piece, they are providing an excess of tree save.
Any other discussion? All in favor, please say aye and signify by raising your right hand.
Aye.
Aye. 4 opposed, like sign.
Aye.
4-3. Get that?
Okay, and just for the record, for those that may be listening or here tonight, the public hearing for this case is scheduled to be heard on Monday, April 19th at 6 p.m. right here in the City Works building. There is an opportunity for continued public comment and testimony at that meeting as well.
Thank you, Shelley. I'd like to thank the city, environmental folks, and the developers for working together. This isn't easy. You know,
Yeah.
as you found out through this discussion here, I think it's good, healthy discussion. But I think the process works. I think we showed that, and I appreciate willingness to come back for a second meeting. If there's no further business, Shelley, is there any other further business?
No, sir.
I have one quick point. Can we petition city council or whoever would have authority over this to develop a stormwater and erosion control committee, or at least get a process going to update our ordinance?
Absolutely, that's excellent. And
That's a
we
good
already
idea.
have direction to look at our TIA process and some
Yeah,
of
'cause
our
I know we started
thresholds and
that.
such, so this would be another topic.
Okay.
Nothing else, we stand adjourned.
Thank you.